When I ask my students about conflicts that they have experienced and how they react to them, students often say that if a conflict arises suddenly, they freeze and they don't know what to do, or they may react impulsively, regardless of what the details of the conflict are. And I want to talk here about analyzing conflicts in an introductory way. I'm going to take some ideas from the Kingian nonviolence training, and then, as I often do, I'm going to add some ideas that come from experience with teaching this material and also from psychology. Conflict can be analyzed, and I'm going to try to show what I mean by that by looking at three dimensions along which conflicts can differ. And the first is that there may be different types of conflict. The nature of the conflict may be over different kinds of issues. And one type of conflict, of course, is when people have a common need and they are fighting over scarce resources. That's called a distributive conflict. So what we try to do in analyzing different types of conflict is to say, okay, what is it in a distributive conflict that the people have in common with each other, even though they are fighting? And for distributive conflict, it would appear that they have the need for the scarce resource in common. So that maybe that should be looked at to see what can be done about satisfying the need. There's a famous example that's used in business schools where two countries are competing with each other to buy the entire year's orange crop from a third country, let's say Brazil. And it appears at first that this is a very angry conflict, and it's not obvious how one country can get all the oranges and leave the other country with nothing. But on closer examination of the needs that each of these competing countries have, turns out one country wants the juice from the oranges because they are manufacturing orange juice and other beverages from the orange juice. And the other rival in this conflict wants the seeds and the rind from the oranges because they're making pharmaceuticals or there's some other chemical process that they're interested in. And I think once it's realized that they want different parts of the orange, we can imagine ways in which both of those conflicting countries could be satisfied. And then the distributive conflict is solved. It's no longer a conflict. They've come to a resolution of it. Another type of conflict is a pathway conflict, in which the two opposing sides of the conflict have the same goal, but they disagree on how to achieve that goal. For example, two friends might agree that they want to go to Cleveland to see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But one wants to go on the interstate and get there as quickly as possible, and the other wants to take the side roads and see some of the scenery along the way. And I think you can imagine how, given that they have the same goal, they might be able to resolve this through some kind of sharing of preferences. spend time on the interstate to get to the part of the country where the country roads are really beautiful, and then take the country roads for part of the trip. So in a pathway conflict, again, we are offered clues to how to solve the conflict by looking at the parts of the conflict that the two people have in common. Another type of conflict is one in which two people have incompatible goals. And the problem is they can't just walk away from each other, even though they have this fundamental difference in goals. For some reason, they must stay together. And so the conflict continues. They may be members of the same family, for example, so they have to stay together. Or they may have jobs in the same workplace, and so they have to stay together. And in that situation, that family or workplace where they share space and time together is what they have in common. But I think we all know that that may not be enough to really solve things. One of the things that is hard to witness in the academic world when everybody has tenure is that if you are in a conflict with someone, you're stuck with them for a long time. But again, we might be able to imagine ways in which the common family or work environment could offer ways for people to reconcile their differences. The most difficult type of conflict is probably value conflict, where people have very different ideas, very different philosophies or ideologies that they are committed to. And value conflicts are very difficult to deal with because of those strongly held beliefs. I think in some cases, people who are in a value conflict can find some areas to communicate over things that they can agree on. And those may grow out of the fact that they have a common humanity between them. And being human beings, we actually have a lot of needs in common. We probably admire a lot of the same things. We have some values that are not in conflict, even though we have a conflict over something that is very central to us and to what we think is important. So there are different types of conflict. This list is not, again, it's not magic. It's just that it's illustrating that conflicts have different architectures, and the nature of the conflict may offer clues as to how to approach a solution that would be nonviolent and serve the needs of both parties. Another dimension along which conflicts differ is what we can call levels of the conflict, level of conflict. Some conflicts are normal. Two people on a YouTube video playing chess with each other and sort of kidding each other and goading each other and so on. They're playing a game, and the game has rules, and they're both following the rules. The conflict is normal, and no intervention is necessary when the conflict is normal. But in some discussions, people's emotions can be triggered. They can start to feel some psychological aggression or violence or mean-spirited feeling toward the other person. Their posture may change, the tone of voice may change. And so beyond normal conflict, there is what we could call an escalating level of conflict where people are different. They're different physiologically, they're different behaviorally, and the relationship that they have to the other person that they're in the conflict with is changing. Finally, that escalating conflict may break out into open fighting, sort of an overt level of conflict. So to keep it simple, let's just think of those three levels. There's sort of a normal level, a psychologically violent level, and then a physically violent level. What are we looking for here? Well, as the level changes, the type of intervention that is likely to be practical changes. If we're trying to de-escalate from psychological violence back to a more normal level of conflict, we want to use negotiation skills. Even in the police forces that have hostage negotiators, some of their skills are very appropriate to that de-escalation from psychological violence back toward normal. And those negotiators talk in a normal voice. They try to use the person's first name. They try to make connections and interest the hostage taker in things that are of personal importance and value to him or her. And we know a lot about negotiation, and those skills become relevant when we're de-escalating from one level of conflict to another. At the higher level, where there is overt fighting, we may need a stronger type of intervention. It may be necessary to restrain the one or both of the people who are fighting. The skills that we use and the level of skill that we will find appropriate changes with the level of conflict. And this is reminiscent of what a module in really good police academy training, where officers are trained on a ladder of force, starting with the mere presence of an officer on the scene of a conflict or an altercation or some other incident, and then working up a ladder through verbal skills that the officer can use to eventually physical restraints without weapons, and eventually the use of weapons, either to deter or to actually bring down one of the people who is involved in the conflict. A difficulty that we've seen in the news in recent years is police officers going immediately to the highest level of force and using their weapons without going through other steps on that ladder. And that's a breakdown of training. And it's also a breakdown of good thinking. It's as if the weapons are being used as a substitute, not only for those other rungs on the ladder, but as a substitute for courage. It does take courage to be a police officer and to go into difficult situations with skills that have been acquired through academy training. It takes courage to use those skills, and it takes a little bit of time. We often find in applying nonviolence that time is our friend. If we can allow a little more time to elapse, it allows emotions to change. It allows more reliable and reasonable kinds of thinking to come in. And those ideas are all relevant to this dimension of levels of conflict as well. The last dimension that I'll mention is the role that you have in relation to the conflict, because you might be a participant yourself. You might be one of the people who is in the conflict. You might be one of the people who is fighting in a conflict that has reached a high level. And But you may also just be a bystander to a conflict, to a fight that's going on with other people being the participants. Or you might be even further away. You might be a remote observer who is aware of the conflict, but you're across the street, you're somewhere, maybe watching it on TV or something like that. And the important thing about this variable is that the range of options that you have is greatest when you're a remote observer. But the closer you get to the conflict, the more your options narrow. And especially in the case where there's a fight going and you're a participant in it, you have very few options at all. You may find that you've been forced into violence. You may have to defend yourself forcefully. And you may not have very many things that you can choose to do. That's the nature of those situations, and it's a reason for trying to avoid them. In other videos, I'll talk about some ideas that are related to that, such as the whole idea of self-defense within a nonviolence framework. And we'll talk for a bit about just war theory in another video. That's a very important concept in political science and international relations and in military academies like the Naval War College or West Point. And those are deserving of some treatment from a nonviolence perspective, because I imagine that many people don't know what nonviolence has to say about those things. But we'll get to those perhaps in the next couple of videos. If you have found this interesting and informative, please subscribe to this channel, Learning Nonviolence, and give the video a like, and I will see you next time. Thank you.